Bruno was a 16-year-old boy with a pensive air and a penchant for solitude. He spent most of his free time immersed in mystery and suspense novels, and was known among his schoolmates for his insatiable curiosity and introspective nature. Although he preferred the company of his readings to social interactions, Bruno was not unhappy. He simply found more comfort in the world of words and stories than in the reality around him. Bruno Collins lived in Ashford, a picturesque little town in the English countryside. Known for its cobblestone streets and Victorian houses, Ashford seemed to have stopped in time. The surrounding green hills and the constant murmur of the river Stour gave the place an almost bucolic tranquility. However, behind this apparent serenity, Ashford kept dark secrets. It was an ordinary weekend when Bruno decided to explore the attic of his house. The place had not been visited in years, accumulating dust and objects forgotten by time. The creaking stairs seemed to protest with each step as he climbed, but Bruno was determined. He felt that the attic held secrets waiting to be discovered. Upon reaching it, his eyes scanned the piles of dusty boxes, antique furniture covered with sheets, and scattered books. After a few minutes of rummaging, something caught his eye in a wooden box. It was a photo hidden under a layer of dust. Bruno carefully cleaned the surface and revealed the image. The photo showed an ethereal-looking girl with long, wavy brown hair and piercing eyes. She seemed to radiate an aura of mystery and charm. She was doing a victory sign with her fingers, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Bruno was mesmerized by the girl's beauty and the intensity of her expression. He felt a shiver run down his spine as his eyes remained fixed on the photo. The attraction was immediate and overwhelming, as if something in the image had connected directly to his heart. It was a strange and intense feeling, unlike anything he had ever felt before. Bruno wondered who the girl was, where she came from, and why she seemed so familiar, despite never having seen her before. Carefully putting the photo away, Bruno decided he needed to find out more about her. Something inside him, a mixture of curiosity and an inexplicable sense of connection, urged him to seek answers. The girl's photo became Bruno's obsession. He began his investigation by asking his parents and grandparents if they knew anything about the girl. However, his questions were met with confused looks and shrugs. No one seemed to remember a girl like that, and this only increased Bruno's mystery and determination. He began visiting older neighbors, those who had lived in the area for decades, but the answers were always the same. Some vaguely mentioned a story about a young woman who mysteriously disappeared many years ago, but no concrete details. Frustrated, Bruno turned his attention to the internet and the local library. In the following weeks, he spent hours on end browsing genealogy websites, local history forums, and old newspaper archives. At the library, he examined microfilms of yellowed newspapers, looking for any mention of the girl. That's how he found a small news item dated 1958 about the disappearance of a young woman named Elisa, who coincidentally resembled the girl in the photo. Elisa had vanished without a trace, and the case was never solved. Bruno's obsession began to interfere with his daily life. He skipped classes, turned in incomplete assignments, and his school performance plummeted. Concerned teachers tried to talk to him, but Bruno reacted with rejection and irritation, claiming they didn't understand the importance of what he was doing. His parents, alarmed by the change in his behavior, also tried to intervene, but Bruno closed himself off more and more into his world of mystery. Then the visions began. At first, they were soft and almost dreamlike. Bruno saw the girl in the photo, whom he now knew was Elisa, in unlikely places, in the reflection of the window, among the leaves of the trees, or in the shadows of his room. She seemed to be smiling at him, and these visions increased his fascination and the feeling of connecting with something beyond reality. But the visions didn't stay soft for long. Gradually, they became more intense and disturbing. Elisa appeared in the mirrors, with her eyes fixed on Bruno, her smile now resembling a mimicry of despair. He saw her in increasingly frequent and unexpected places, and her appearance became more distorted and terrifying. Bruno began to feel that Elisa was trying to communicate something, an urgent message that he couldn't decipher. At first, he felt a mixture of excitement and fear, probably influenced by the superhero stories he loved. He thought he was starting an adventure where he could free a lady in distress or even, who knows, rescue his true love. The visions invaded his dreams, turning them into vivid nightmares where he was chased by her through endless corridors and dark rooms. The line between reality and hallucinations began to blur, leaving Bruno in a constant state of anxiety and fear. He knew he needed to uncover the truth about Elisa to end the visions. But with every step he took towards the truth, the visions became more threatening. The initial obsession slowly transformed into a nightmare from which Bruno could not escape, pushing him deeper and deeper into a psychological and supernatural abyss. Bruno's hallucinations began to transform into something much more sinister. They were no longer just soft, dreamlike apparitions. Now, they were relentless persecutions. Bruno saw Elisa everywhere. Her reflection watched him in the mirrors. Her eyes followed him in store windows, and even in the midst of crowds he could distinguish her pale face and long brown hair. What began as visual visions intensified. Elisa began to whisper Bruno's name. Initially, it was a soft, almost imperceptible whisper that he heard when he was alone at home. But over time, the whisper grew louder and more frequent, invading his personal and mental space. Bruno could hear his name echoing in the school corridors, in the silence of the night, and even in the midst of the city noise. It was as if reality itself was conspiring to torment him. Desperate to escape the persecution, Bruno decided to get rid of the photo. He burned it, tore it up, and even tried to bury it in a remote location. But the photo always reappeared in his house, intact and hauntingly present. With each failed attempt, Elisa's presence became more oppressive. The idea that he would never be able to get rid of her began to gnaw at his sanity. Bruno's behavior changed dramatically. He became withdrawn and paranoid, pushing away friends and family who tried to help him. His nights were plagued by insomnia and nightmares, and he began to avoid mirrors and reflective surfaces, fearing Elisa's face. The hallucinations intensified, turning into visions of Elisa emerging from the shadows, walking towards him with a vacant and terrifying look. Bruno's mental health began to deteriorate visibly. He was always tired, with deep dark circles and bloodshot eyes. His mind was in a constant state of alertness and fear, and he began to doubt his own sanity. More and more, Bruno felt that Elisa was getting closer, not just as a distant figure, but as a tangible and threatening presence. Bruno began to avoid any kind of social interaction. He couldn't concentrate in class and his grades plummeted. The teachers, aware of his change in behavior, tried to intervene, but Bruno pushed them away, refusing to explain what was happening. His parents, concerned, suggested professional help, but he vehemently rejected the idea, believing that no one could understand what he was facing. The visions became more vivid and invasive. He saw Elisa approaching him, her ethereal figure becoming more solid and menacing. In the most terrifying moments, Bruno could feel her icy breath, hear her footsteps, and even feel a cold touch on his skin. He was being hunted by a presence that transcended reality and was determined to claim him. The constant panic and lack of sleep began to take a toll. Bruno began to have nervous breakdowns, crying uncontrollably and screaming at Elisa's shadow. He would lock himself in his room for hours, trying to hide from a presence that seemed capable of crossing any barrier. The line between reality and hallucination was completely blurred, leaving Bruno at the mercy of a supernatural force that seemed to feed on his fear and despair. In his state of growing paranoia, Bruno began to believe that Elisa was trying to communicate something, but the message was distorted by fear and madness. Every whisper, every apparition seemed to be laden with a desperate urgency, as if she wanted to reveal a terrible secret that Bruno could not understand. The quest for the truth about Elisa, which had begun as an innocent curiosity, had turned into a living nightmare, dragging Bruno deeper and deeper into an abyss of terror and unfathomable despair. Bruno's hallucinations reached an unbearable point. Elisa was no longer an occasional figure in reflections or a shadow in the corner of his eye. Now she was everywhere at any time of day or night. Her pale face and empty eyes haunted him incessantly, becoming more real and menacing with each appearance. During the day, Bruno saw Elisa in every corner of the school, watching him from the classroom door, appearing in windows and hallways. At home, she was always present, emerging in mirrors, the shadows of his room, and even reflected in the surface of the water. At night, the visions became even more intense. Elisa appeared beside his bed, her eyes fixed on him, while her whispers turned into high-pitched screams that echoed in his mind. Bruno could no longer sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elisa's face approaching, her cold, skeletal fingers almost touching his skin. He woke up sweating, his heart racing, feeling that at any moment she would become solid and drag him to an unknown and terrifying fate. Bruno's despair reached its peak when he began to see Elisa not just at home or school, but everywhere he went. She was on the streets, among the people, in the shop windows, always watching, always chasing. His mental state deteriorated rapidly, paranoia and panic consuming him completely. On a night of absolute despair, Bruno decided he had to escape. He didn't know where to go, just that he had to escape the visions that were driving him mad. He grabbed his father's car keys and ran out of the house, his heart pounding like a deafening drum in his chest. Driving frantically through the city, Bruno tried to escape the visions. But the more he drove, the more Elisa's presence seemed to intensify. She appeared in the rearview mirrors, on the side of the road, and even sitting in the passenger seat. Her whispers turned into screams of despair, echoing inside the car, turning it into a chamber of psychological torture. Bruno accelerated faster and faster, the car's headlights illuminating the dark city streets. His mind was in a whirlwind of panic, and he could barely distinguish reality from hallucinations. Elisa's figure seemed to be approaching, more solid and menacing, her empty eyes filled with an insatiable hunger. He couldn't think clearly, fear dominating all his senses. The city streets became a confusing maze, and Bruno felt like he was being hunted by an implacable and supernatural force. Every turn, every street seemed to lead him deeper into a nightmare from which there was no escape. In a moment of sheer terror, Bruno saw Elisa emerge directly in front of the car, her translucent figure glowing under the headlights. He tried to swerve, but the sight of her pale face and empty eyes was paralyzing. The car skidded on the wet road, spinning out of control. The sound of squealing tires and twisting metal filled the air. The car slammed violently into a tree, the impact throwing Bruno against the steering wheel. The world around him fell silent, and Elisa's figure disappeared, leaving only a feeling of emptiness and darkness. Bruno lay there, trapped in the wreckage of the car, his body motionless and his mind finally at peace. The chase was over, but at a terrible cost. Elisa's photo, which he thought he had gotten rid of, was there, on the seat next to him, intact and mysteriously present, as a final symbol of the terror that had consumed him. The impact of the accident was devastating. Bruno, seriously injured, was trapped in the wreckage of the car, his last moments filled with agony and regret. Darkness began to engulf his vision, and the sounds around him became muffled and distant. Amidst the intense pain, a strange peace began to settle in. Elisa's figure had disappeared, leaving an unsettling void. When the first responders arrived at the scene, they found a scene of destruction and mystery. The car was unrecognizable, shrouded in an aura of calamity. Paramedics worked frantically to try to save Bruno, but his body was too fragile. He took his last breath surrounded by unfamiliar faces, his mind finally freed from the relentless torment that had haunted him. Among the debris, something caught the attention of one of the rescuers. An old, intact photo on the seat next to Bruno. It was the same photo that had triggered the entire chain of tragic events. The image of Elisa, the missing girl with the enigmatic smile. However, there was something different. Now, instead of the victory V sign, Elisa was making a 3 with her fingers, as if the photo had somehow changed supernaturally. The police investigated the accident, but found few answers. The circumstances were mysterious and disturbing. Witnesses claimed to have seen Bruno driving as if he was fleeing from something invisible, his eyes filled with terror. The vehicle's data indicated no mechanical failure, and the road, although wet from the rain, did not justify the loss of control that caused the fatal collision. Bruno's accident quickly became the subject of discussion in the small town. People speculated about what could have driven a promising young man to such a tragic end. Friends and family were in shock, trying to reconcile the image of the Bruno they knew with the disturbing story that emerged from his last weeks. Over time, the legend of the girl in the photo took on a life of its own. The stories about Elisa and her mysterious disappearance were revived, now with the addition of Bruno's tragedy. Some said he had fallen victim to an ancient curse. Others believed Elisa was a vengeful spirit who had chosen Bruno as her last victim. The photo became a symbol of the mystery, laden with an almost mythical power. In the epilogue of this dark story, Elisa's photo was kept as evidence, but her presence continued to haunt those who knew the story. The legend of Elisa and Bruno spread, perpetuating the enigma of their lives and deaths. People told the story in hushed tones, with a hint of reverence and fear, as if the very act of talking about them could attract the unwanted attention of supernatural forces. Bruno was gone, but his legacy remained, intertwined with the mystery of Elisa. The photo, now a haunted relic, was a constant reminder of the fine line between curiosity and obsession, between life and death. And so, the story of Bruno and Elisa continued to be told, a tale of psychological and supernatural horror that echoed through time, leaving an indelible mark on the collective memory of the city. How long will this photo remain locked away before it piques the curiosity of another person?